Hey, I'm Greg.
And I'm Julie.
And we've had quite a journey together over the years. A lot of people don't realize it. We almost didn't make it.
I grew up in a family where every abuse was present: physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And so with that, I carried into our relationship just a lot of baggage. I spent the majority of my time trying to control Greg, trying to be his Holy Spirit. And I remember, Greg shared that the first couple years of our marriage, that literally almost didn't make it. What that really was is we were fighting every single day. We were two Christians who loved one another passionately, but we fought just as passionately. We loved Christ, but we didn't know how to make him a part of our home. And so with that, I remember one night in particular, we call it the night of the fight. We were about, 2 years in, and I was trying to control Greg, trying to create this bubble-wrapped universe where he couldn't hurt me. What I do remember is you speeding off in an SUV.
And I remember that I shouted back to Julie. I was just exasperated. And I said to her, baby, I love you, but I cannot do this anymore. And so I ripped out of the driveway and sped off and left her there at the house by herself.
And I remember, so as I'm hearing the screeching of the tires going, it was that place in life where, I don't know if you've ever been there, but you think, how in the world did I end up here?
Yeah.
And so I went back into the house, and I remember falling flat on my face, just prostrate before God, and started telling God all the ways that he should change Greg, and telling him all the ways that he was wrong and I was right. And God let me go on for quite some time, and finally, just a puddled mess. I got to that place where I was like, God, I just don't care though. Change me, change him, do whatever it takes, but heal our marriage. And so after that long exasperation of a list of all the things of the ways he should change, I remember I got really quiet enough that I didn't hear audibly, but there was this impression that went through my head that said, Julie, quit being Greg's Holy Spirit. But it was also at that point, and I realized there were so many ways that I really was trying to control him. And then this next thought came into my mind. It was like, would you entrust Greg to me and allow me to change in him the things that I think need to be changed? And by the way, baby girl, would you allow me to change in you the things that need to be changed? It was the first time I'd ever considered that I could possibly be at fault. We kind of make a little laugh out of it now, but the truth was, at that point, it was a point of desperation. It was a point where something needed to change. And that night, that fight began the journey of healing. I began to try to love Greg like God had loved me.
Yeah, and my part was that I had an explosive temper. And so when Julie would ask me questions, remember, this is a woman who come from a lot of brokenness and a lot of hurt. And rather than being a man and responding to that hurt with love and encouragement and trying to build her confidence up, I would leverage that and become infuriated by it. I would take it personally as a personal attack as she was challenging my integrity when she would ask questions, and then I would just flip out and we would end up in these horrible fights. But I remember that night too, babe, because not just because I tore out of the driveway, and sped off, but because from that moment forward, you began to change. You began to really focus on loving me as I was, and like you said, really not trying to be my Holy Spirit. And instead, rather than controlling me, just encouraging me and trying to encourage my dreams. And I know that one of the things you even did is that you brought me a big fishing basket, with some lures. And so the point is that you became very, very intentional about trying to speak love to me in a language that I could hear and that I could receive. That was exactly what began the turning point. And so we were leaders in a business, and as we were leading business and we ingested lots of self-help and a lot of just leadership material and such, we began to grow as individuals. And as we began to grow as individuals, we realized that it was beginning to affect our home. And so those are a lot of the principles that we formed in those days that we leverage now to help other couples find their way forward. And we learned how to live purpose-focused rather than problem-focused. We learned that rather than tearing one another down and pointing out all of one another's faults, if we could just speak life over one another and become intentional about loving one another and speaking life over one another, then life would work out a whole lot better.
There's actually an article in Time magazine that said every spouse desires a spouse that sees them for who they are, accepts them for who they are, but brings out the best in who they are.
Right.
And I remember at that point when the Holy Spirit interrupted me that night in my long exasperation of how you should be changed. He said, Julie, love Greg like I loved you. And it immediately took me back to a place in time where I was doing a lot of things that just weren't so lovely. God took me back to this place where I was sitting at the edge of a bar. And my intent that night was to get as drunk as possible, as quick as possible. Certainly no invitation for God's kindness to show up, but that's exactly what happened. You see, in that place, I was looking just to numb the pain. I didn't want to be alive, but my faith said I needed to stay. And so I didn't know how to move forward, but I was just stuck, and so I was just in this rat wheel of just surviving. And so my intent that night was to get, like I said, as drunk as possible, as quick as possible, but then the Holy Spirit showed up and said, Julie, there's nowhere you can run that my grace won't find you. And so that night, that fight, when God interrupted my thoughts and said, love Greg like I've loved you, my mind immediately went back to that place. And what I realized is I loved Greg with conditions. I loved him as long as he never hurt me. I loved him as long as he thought everything I thought and did everything that I thought he should do. And it really put you in a place of impossibility to ever please me because I had so many needs because of all the brokenness. And so that night, what the invitation that God was inviting me to is, why don't you try to just let go of all of those things and entrust your spouse to me? Mm-hmm. Will you trust me enough to entrust your spouse? And by the way, there's some things in your life that need to be cleaned up too, and I want to set you free from those things. So it wasn't this condemnation, it was an invitation. But what was so great is I began to change the way I was thinking. And so I looked for the things that I loved about you instead of all the things that I thought were lacking. And I started to think, okay, how can I serve you rather than always looking to be served? And so those first two kind of thoughts began to change in me. And I certainly didn't do it perfect, but it was the opportunity for us to start loving one another.
It paved the way. It paved the way for us to begin to grow together again. I remember when it dawned on me that I had a great opportunity in front of me. We have the opportunity with the person that we're with to be able to build them up. The Bible tells us that the power of life and death are in the tongue. And boy, let me tell you, I was leveraging mine for the power of death, doing anything and everything to cut her down to size, make sure that she knew her place in life, and was just lashing out at her in anger. And I can remember when God prompted my heart that I needed to learn how to love her unconditionally and how to speak life over her and to speak to the things that were awesome about her, the things that I love about her. And it didn't really come naturally. I love Julie, but it didn't come naturally to do all those things. Again, remember, we were in a place where we were arguing and fighting every single day. But I remember as I began to become intentional, and I used to think before I pulled in the driveway, I would think, okay, my family have had their own, they've had their own day. My kids have had their own day. My wife has had her own day. And I used to come home and I was thinking, man, I hope dinner's ready. I sure hope she's in a good mood. But I remember as I began to prepare my mind to be home, and instead of preparing to be served, I literally began to stop in my driveway before I walked in my home and think, what's my family going to need me to be? And I would come in, I would prepare my heart and allow the Holy Spirit to really prepare my heart to actually be home and serve. So instead of coming home with a bunch of expectations and griping about how bad my day was, I came in and I started learning how to serve her and say, hey baby, how was your day? How is it that I can help you? And it was these little things that begin to make all of the difference.
What's powerful about what God did in our relationship is we've lived a lot of life. Because of where God has brought us from and to, we love empowering couples to live into their purpose rather than their problems. Helping you to live purpose-focused, not problem-focused in your relationship.